It's strange to think that I can still remember the smell after all this time. The year was 1978, not long after my 15th birthday, and I'd sneaked into my brother's bedroom. There on a wall of shelves that stretched to the ceiling were the heaviest books we had in our house, 24 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. I carefully pulled out the volume mark and turned to the entry for Hodgkin's disease. It took forever to read the half-dozen paragraphs, but the last line I understood all too well. 75% of the people who got it would die within 5 years. As it turns out, I did not die from Hodgkin's, though the cancer had already spread from my neck to my lungs and spleen. I lost my spleen to surgery and most of my hair to chemotherapy and radiation, but I was lucky.
Clifton Leaf is a survivor. He'll never forget his standoff with cancer. Now a journalist for a major American magazine, he has abiding memories of the suffering and anguish he went through. Perhaps this is what gives him the right to ask awkward questions, to challenge generally accepted ideas. For although Clifton Leaf won his own personal war against the disease, how many more are struggling in uncertainty? How many will be forced to give up the fight?
1,500 Americans die of cancer every single day. As one researcher pointed out to me, that's the equivalent of one World Trade Center tower collapsing in a fiery ball every single day. Imagine that, a 9/11 every 2 days, all from cancer deaths. It's an unthinkable tragedy, and no one ever really thinks about it in that proportion.
Cancer has become the scourge of our industrialized societies. We wanted to know why. When we met him, Clifton Leaf had just spent several months traveling around the United States, doing research into how the war on cancer was progressing. Like us, he'd been influenced by the optimism of official declarations, and he wasn't expecting the results he uncovered.
When I first set out to do this story, I thought we were entering a new age of cancer breakthroughs, of molecularly targeted medicine. That's really what I wanted to look at. I thought that was a good business story for Fortune. I thought that was a good science story, and it was exciting to me that we were turning the corner in the war. It was only after looking at the numbers that I began to wonder that something else was going on. And after starting to talk to people and discovering that, in fact, we were not doing well at all in this war, and that changed everything.
The magazine's headline may seem shocking, yet if it really is a war, we need to know how it's being waged. We need to understand how business rivalries dictate the direction research takes, and how influential lobbies put a lid on unpalatable statistics. In order to understand, we must go back 30 years to a decisive moment in the story, a moment when politics and science seem to be heading towards a common goal. (1969). The Apollo program had achieved its aim and put a man on the moon. A giant leap for mankind, indeed, but an example, too, of the sin of pride. There was a growing feeling that nothing could now resist the power of the human brain. All that was needed was enough energy and sufficient funding. 2 years later, Nixon uttered a short and thereafter famous speech declaring war on cancer. It was a war which he imagined would be short and glorious, like the Apollo program.
I will also ask for an appropriation of an extra $100 million to launch an intensive campaign to find a cure for cancer, and I will ask later for whatever additional funds can effectively be used. The time has come in America when the same kind of concentrated effort that split the atom and took man to the moon should be turned toward conquering this dread disease.
At the time, America was bogged down in Vietnam. Nixon sorely needed a victory.
We were a country at war at that time. The war in Vietnam was still being waged. So there had been talk about that we could wage war and have domestic programs at the same time. It was a policy that was called guns and butter. And I think the war on cancer was an example of that. It was used, the terminology was wartime terminology, but it was saying we could solve a major health problem while we were still fighting a war.
This warlike vocabulary soon captured people's imagination. Cancer was henceforth the enemy. Drugs were the weapons used against it, selected from a therapeutic arsenal by the doctor generals who decided the strategy. Every war needs its propaganda.
with the hope that the same kind of concentrated effort that took man to the moon will one day conquer this disease, cancer.
Nixon had promised the discovery of a treatment within 5 years. The media shared this very political optimism.
No one who was involved in writing the bill thought that it would cure cancer in 5 years, and that's the kind of foolish information that's put forth by those in advertising and politics who try to persuade people that things are simple. Cancer is not simple.
War was declared, the enemy identified, but no one knew anything about this enemy. Cancer at the time was a black hole.
On savait que le cancer était des cellules qui devenaient folles, qui devenaient anarchistes, comme on disait alors, qui n'obéissaient plus aux lois des tissus, qui devenaient autonomes, indépendantes, qui s'infiltraient chez les autres, un petit peu comme des bandits qui allaient visiter les maisons voisines. Donc il y avait cette notion déjà très claire que c'était une maladie d'une cellule qui était devenue un petit peu folle. Mais on ne savait pas pourquoi, et on ne savait pas comment on pouvait changer les choses.
The aim of any treatment was to destroy these crazy cells, and the weapons were well known. The most ancient of these mentioned in Egyptian papyruses was surgery. It was also the most effective. Radiotherapy came into use early in the 20th century. Using a radioactive source, radium and then cobalt, the cancerous cells are bombarded with ionizing rays. But when the tumor is deep down, the rays burn the surface tissues without affecting the cancer. After the scalpel and burning, the third weapon is poison. The first tests carried out on patients with leukemia were done with mustard gas, used as a weapon in the First World War. Chemotherapy was born of these trials. Its aim is to kill the cancerous cells that have colonized various parts of the patient's body, the metastases.
Our weapons to deal with cancer were weapons of destruction. And these weapons were very powerful, but they also had very serious consequences and side effects. We knew that it was the disease that people feared the most. It was associated with death and suffering. It was very frightening. Many people didn't even talk about cancer.
In those years, the surgeon always came first. He felt responsible for the patient, for possible relapses, and therefore didn't want to leave a single cancerous cell around the site of the tumor.
In the 1970s, more and more extensive surgery was being done. Pelvic exonerations, which would remove the bladder and the rectum and the uterus in women who had advanced cervical cancer. Exonerations of the face that would remove large portions of the face for advanced cancers, but these operations were very rarely curative.
C'était le malade au bout du couloir qui hurlait nuit et jour. C'était ça le cancer. C'était des gens qui passaient en rasant les murs avec le regard bas parce qu'ils étaient amputés du sein, des muscles sous le sein. C'est des gens qui étaient brûlés, qui avaient du mal à respirer. Sans compter l'aspect social du cancer. Cette maladie, source de discrimination, d'exclusion, de ce regard si particulier des gens. Ces malades souffraient sans espoir, sans rien. Ils n'avaient rien d'autre à attendre que la mort. Cette mort venait doucement et venait en faisant mal. Et moi, je me souviens, jeune interne, de ces malades-là. Alors, ils n'avaient pas, pour beaucoup de médecins, ils n'étaient pas les malades les plus intéressants du service, parce qu'il y avait d'autres pathologies qu'on pouvait traiter et guérir. Et c'est quand même ça qui intéresse les médecins, c'est traiter et guérir. Donc on avait la tuberculose avec les antituberculeux, les infections avec les antibiotiques, etc.
C'était des laissés pour compte. C'était des espèces de parias de la société. Et ça, nous ne voulions pas que ces malades soient des parias de la société. Et c'est pour cela qu'il y avait une énergie phénoménale et que nous avions le sentiment, en plus, que nous construisions l'avenir et que nous travaillions non pas, bien sûr, pour les malades immédiats, mais en plus, en créant cette nouvelle discipline médicale, que nous avions le sentiment que nous allions faire des progrès majeurs à la médecine.
The most dramatic cases were children. In 1945, all children with cancer would die. There were major difficulties to overcome, especially with leukemia, cancer of the blood. The surgeon was of no use here, and chemotherapy, with a small choice of products, only managed partial remissions. Dangerous last-chance trials were conducted, like bone marrow transplants.
C'était des malades qui étaient condamnés à mort et qui étaient condamnés à mort à brève échéance. Donc on avait le droit, et on avait même le devoir de tout essayer pour les sauver. Mais c'était des situations épouvantables dans lesquelles on se trouvait, avec des enfants qu'on mettait dans un état épouvantable et qui souvent mouraient dans des conditions difficiles.
Ne t'inquiète pas, tu n'auras pas mal. Ferme le point fort.
This child is about to receive a bone marrow transplant, provided by a donor in an adjoining operating theatre. To reduce the possibility of rejection, the child is first completely irradiated, stripped of all his immune defenses. This revolutionary treatment was developed at Virage Hospital in France in the 1960s. It paved the way for the compatible bone marrow transplants carried out today. The children at the time did not survive.
In children, it's hard to forget a child who dies and dies of a disease that you are incapable of helping.
In 1955, James Holland was a member of the team which achieved the world's first cure by chemotherapy of a cancer of the placenta. Here at the Roosevelt Institute in New York State, he devoted all his energy to treating children with leukemia. He innovated, experimented, came up with new protocols.
When you know that the child is going to die unless you do something, it makes it easier to do something. When you recognize the responsibility for the child's life rests in your hands, then you have to be good at giving the appropriate antibiotics, good at giving the appropriate support, and devising the treatments that are potentially valuable. Is there worry? Sure, but would a good oncologist be scared? No, a good oncologist would say, this is what I must do because it's the best possible alternative.
Gradually, the remission times lengthened.